Southeaster Lodge by J. Grace Pennington. Narrated by J. Grace Pennington. Chapter 1. No one who had seen Katy Meyer in infancy would suppose her born to be a heroine. And rather than resenting that fact, she delighted in it, since everyone knew that no true heroine ever appeared to be so at first. No heroines were born of seemingly ordinary girls who seized opportunities to embark on extraordinary adventures. Katy, then, was always on the lookout for such chances. For the first 19 years of her life, she did not seem destined to encounter any, and there were no indications that this chilly February Monday would be the fateful day. So far, it had been like any other, a mess of chores and errands that culminated in an afternoon curled on her family's worn living room couch with her favorite book. "Katy!" Putting the book down with a sigh, Katy emerged from the cushions of the couch to find herself confronted by the peanut butter-smeared face of her 4-year-old sister Matilda. "What is it?" she asked. "Can you wash my face?" With another sigh, Katy smiled and took the child's hand in hers. "Okay." They encountered further signs of peanut butter on the way to the bathroom, and the evidence suggested that Matilda had not been responsible for all of it. A smear on the wall, a dollop on the floor, an upside-down lid to a freshly opened jar. "Peter!" she yelled as they reached the bathroom. A little boy's head, topped by wild red hair, peered around the corner. "It wasn't my fault." Katy assisted Matilda in her climb up the bathroom stool, then turned on the water so the child could rinse her hands. "You're sure about that?" The boy crept into the room, face far too innocent to be guiltless. "We were just trying to make some granola bars for Mom." Of course, all this was done for Mom. It wouldn't have anything to do with two children who loved granola bars themselves. "Here." She handed a washcloth to the boy and grabbed another to wash the little face now grimacing in the mirror. "Start cleaning. I'll be right there." Peter ran off, and Katy moistened her own cloth and wiped the mess from her little sister's face. "Why didn't you ask David or Amy to help you?" she asked. "They're doing homework. I can help clean up too." Matilda jumped eagerly off the stool and raced out of the room. Katy hurried after her, yelling, No, I'll do it. Maddie, be careful." When she reached the dining room, however, Matilda was already busy smearing peanut butter into the cracks between the floor tiles. Sighing again, Katy got down on her knees and took the dirty rag from the child's hands. "Why don't you go get me a towel? I've got this. Peter, did you finish your homework?" Again, the far too innocent face turned in her direction. "Bring it in here," Katy ordered, resigning herself to an afternoon devoid of reading. "I'll help you when I'm done." And she bent over the tile and began to scrub. By the time Mom came into the room to start dinner, the mess was gone, the lid had been screwed back onto the jar of the offending nut butter, and Peter was loading his finished work into his backpack. Mrs. Meyer looked around the room and raised her eyebrows. "What's been going on here?" "Nothing, Mom." Katy gathered up the dirty rags and towels and offered a worn smile. The children, however, gave themselves away. "We made a mess," Peter confessed. "We tried to make granola bars." "But Katy cleaned up for us," Matilda offered, racing in and attaching herself to her mother's legs. Mrs. Myers shook her head at the culprits. "Next time, ask for help before you try to make a snack. You know that." "Yes, Mama." Matilda gave an angelic smile, and the two ran out of the room. Katy went to move past her mother, arms full of rags and towels, but Mrs. Meyer put a hand on her arm to stop her. "Thank you, Katy. You're so sweet." A pang of conscience assaulted her. She really hadn't been sweet. Honestly, she had been inwardly grumbling the entire time, wishing herself back on the couch under a cozy blanket. "They didn't mean to make a mess," she said. Mom smiled and patted her arm. "I know, but they knew just who to come to make it right. You're a blessing." Uncomfortable, Katy smiled back and escaped to the laundry room, where she deposited her load into the washer, then made her way out to the frost-bitten, quiet backyard to feed the cat before dark. After dinner, dishes, and directing her younger siblings to bed, Katy flopped onto her own bed, yawned, and reached for the book on her nightstand. It wasn't there. She sat up. Where had she left it? She had read it today, she knew that much. On the couch right before... Ah, yes, right before being confronted by the peanut butter fiasco. She dragged herself out of bed and back downstairs, hoping it hadn't been taken or moved by smaller hands. When she reached the living room, her mother was there, leaning into the back of the couch, computer on her lap, reading glasses perched on her nose as she surveyed the screen. Katy glanced around the cozy space, not wanting to disturb her mother's work if she didn't have to. There was the book, teetering over one side of the end table near Mrs. Meyer's elbow. Just as she stepped into the room to retrieve it, her mother looked up and eyed her over the top of her glasses. "Oh, I thought you had gone to bed." "I did, but I forgot my book." She stepped to the side table and grabbed it. "What are you reading now, little bookworm?" A worm was not exactly the way Katy wanted to be classified, nor did she want to be categorized as little. "Northanger Abbey." She held up the paperback to display the front cover. "Haven't you already read that one?" Mom patted the seat next to her on the couch with a smile. Katy resigned herself to this interruption of her evening plans and settled next to her mother. "Yes, a few times." "I always thought that was Jane Austen's silliest novel." Katy stiffened as she replied, "I suppose in some ways it is, but that's the point, isn't it? Catherine starts out a little ridiculous and learns to be wiser by the end in how she sees the world and those around her." Mrs. Meyer smiled, the proud smile that always made Katy uneasy, though she never quite knew why. "Maybe you're right. When did my little bookworm get so smart?" "Mom," Katy protested. "I'm sorry. I forget you're not really a little girl anymore." Mom's smile softened, then she looked back down at her laptop. "Actually, I was going to call you in here to talk about that. I had an email from Mrs. Allen this morning. Do you remember her?" Katy had vague recollections of the couple who used to visit, mostly remembering that the lady wore too much makeup and talked a lot, and the man talked very little. "I think so. You went to school with her?" "Yes, college. Anyway, she's staying near Fredericksburg at Southeaster Lodge. It's a popular hotel down there. Very expensive, I believe. She told me that she found out from the owner's daughter that their cleaner left suddenly to care for an aging mother, and they're trying to find someone to replace her. She said if you were interested in the job, she'd recommend you." This was the last thing Katy had expected, and she wasn't sure how to take it. "Cleaning a hotel? Why would she think of me?" Mrs. Meyer smiled again. "She knows you're an adult now, and she knows you're going to want to get out on your own at some point. And hotel isn't quite the right word. It's not like one of those big buildings with hundreds of rooms like we stayed at last summer. It's locally owned, serves 3 meals a day, and I assume it's much cozier and more home-like than a hotel chain would be. But you can look it up online and see if you'd be interested in going there." Very expensive, or so her mother had said. That meant that she would probably meet interesting people there, people who might lead to further opportunities to spread her wings as the growing longing within her prompted. "And Dad's okay with this?" "I talked to him about it a little this morning, and he wanted me to see what you thought. But we both felt it was a good idea." She put her arm around Katy and pulled her close. "Of course, I don't know what I'd do without you." There was the discomfort again. Katy smiled and tried to relax against her mother, but knew she was still a little stiff. "Amy is old enough to help much more than she currently does." This made Mom laugh, and she released Katy with the words, "You're not wrong. Go on up to bed now and think about it. I'm going to wait for Dad to get home. We can talk more about it in the morning, then I'll let Mrs. Allen know what you decide." And Katy made her way back upstairs to her tiny room and inviting bed, where she laid without opening her book and let the words Southeaster Lodge spin in her head. Chapter 2. Late the next Sunday morning, Katy's father walked her all the way through the bus station, past quiet gray people in a quiet gray morning, and kissed her on the cheek before handing her the carry-on luggage she'd brought. "You'll do great, Kate." He smiled at her. "Call us tonight, okay?" She thought she detected a little extra moisture in his eyes, but wasn't positive. She hugged him, said, "I will," then turned inward to find a seat close to the window so she could lean her head against it if she got tired. She had been told the ride would be at least 6 hours. It turned out to be closer to 7, and she buried herself in Northanger Abbey to distract her mind from the contradictory confusion of thoughts and feelings. This was her grand opportunity, and she truly was excited, but she couldn't escape the anxiety of leaving familiarity to venture into the unknown. Under these unpromising auspices, the parting took place and the journey began, she read. It was performed with subtle quietness and uneventful safety. Neither robbers nor tempests befriended them, nor one lucky overturn to introduce them to the hero. She smiled at this. No robbers or tempests beset her journey either, and she was not stupid enough to wish for the bus to overturn just to introduce a little romance into her life. That was much more likely to introduce her to a hospital and insurance complications. Catherine's hero had come to her through much more mundane circumstances, which was how things went for most normal people. Normal people like Katy, who left for jobs a reasonable distance from home. If stepping onto the bus had occurred in a world of gray, stepping off involved a world of many colors. As Katy lugged her bag down the vehicle's steps, she was assaulted by noise, people talking, distant traffic whizzing by, an announcement over the bus station's loudspeaker. The noise was accompanied by scents of gasoline and something fried in too much oil, and she found herself unable to take in all the sights around her. So many people walking in all directions, so many shops on either side of the bus, so much colorful luggage sitting on the ground around her. Her suitcase. She needed to find her suitcase. She glanced around, found her modest purple bag nestled amongst the group, and gripped its handle. A tug didn't release it from its ensconcement, and she let go and tried to ascertain which of the other cases had hers trapped. She reached for a large blue one, only to be met by a screeching, "That's mine!" A tall, thin woman with a nose that barely avoided being pointy swooped in and yanked the large blue case away with a glare at Katy. "I'm sorry," Katy said, feeling a few inches shorter than she had moments before. "I was just trying to—" But the woman had already raced away. With a deep breath, Katy tried again to pull her own suitcase out of the pile, but still couldn't budge it. "Come on," she muttered under her breath. She let go and bent over the pile to try again to see what it was caught on. Tentatively, the thin woman's voice still ringing in her ears, she reached for a black bag that looked like it might be caught on the wheel of hers. A timid tug didn't dislodge that one either. "Can I help you?" A hand reached into her field of vision and gripped the handle of her humble purple luggage with a strong hold, then pulled it out of the pile as though it were a mere sack of feathers. "Thank you," she said, taking the case as she looked up into the face belonging to the hand and the offer. The face was male, narrow, smiling, topped by curly dark hair and bearing dark brown eyes that were a couple inches higher than her own, making her feel even smaller. "No worries," the man said. "I've always been a sucker for a damsel in distress." She laughed, willing her cheeks to remain their normal shade. "Well, thank you anyway." Why couldn't she think of anything more clever to say than a repeat "thank you"? Catherine Morland, for all her naivete, would have had more wit. "I'm actually here to pick someone up," the man went on. "I mean, not in the sense that I just picked up your luggage, but to give someone a ride. It might be you. Katy Meyer?" "Oh, yes, that is me." Again her words felt dull and pathetic, especially against the crisp, bustling atmosphere surrounding them. "Now isn't that lucky?" He held out his right hand. "I'm Harry. Harry Thompson. General Thompson's son, actually. I'm the manager of the lodge." She shook his hand, trying desperately to remember any mention of a Harry Thompson on the web page she had scoured. He wore a gray suit, perfectly tailored, and a burgundy scarf that looked like cashmere, all of which conspired to make her feel the shabbiness of her thrifted jeans and sweater. She searched her brain for something intelligent to say. "Thank you for picking me up. I'm Katy." No sooner had the words left her lips than the defied blush reached her cheeks. He already knew her name, and now she had just thanked him for yet a third time. What must he think of her? He laughed. "Come on then, Katy. Let's get over to Southeaster Lodge and show you around." The drive was short, but there was so much to see that the 10 minutes could have been an hour. Shops lined both sides of the road, and every angled parking space in front of each of them was full. Traffic crawled through, and people lined the sidewalks. Young mothers pushed chic strollers into cafes, groups of middle-aged women with shopping bags looped over their arms strolled and laughed, teenagers with scarves and the latest haircuts moved in and out of boutiques, all much too cool to smile. Harry laughed as Katy's gaze darted back and forth from one side of the car to the other. Enjoying the human zoo? Katy tried to laugh. How absurd she must seem. The country girl ogling her first glimpse of fashionable life in the city. Such a cliché. She folded her hands in her lap. Your humans seem to have escaped from their cages. She wondered if it was a stupid thing to say, but he laughed again, making her relax a little. They have, haven't they? I'll have to speak to the zookeeper about that. And who would that be? Your father? A shadow passed over his features, and she bit her lip, scolding herself for trying to be too clever. That was undoubtedly rude. Should she apologize? But all he said was, I suppose it is. The rest of the drive to the lodge passed in silence, Katy stealing glances at the businesses and crowds along the way. Would she have time or money to peruse these shops herself at some point? Maybe liven up her wardrobe so she looked less like a country mouse? Chop or dye her long, straight brunette locks into something more stylish? Or have a ladylike bite at some hipster bistro with a friend? Would she even make friends here? How busy would she be? She was about to ask Harry for some information about her hours and duties, but before she opened her mouth, he rounded a bend in the road, and Southeaster Lodge appeared ahead of them. It was a sprawling log cabin-style building surrounded by oak trees and green, flourishing grass. Smoke rose from a stone chimney, and a large, pristine gravel parking lot lay on one side. The driveway, too, was perfectly shaped gravel, and she could hear the crunch of rock beneath the wheels as Harry turned the car onto the drive. She leaned forward to peer more closely at the lodge. How many rooms does it have? She asked. 25. Well, 20 right now. The back wing is closed for construction. Had she imagined the hesitation in his voice as he said this? The pause that sounded just a little too long between the first number he'd given and the second? And are they usually all full? It varies. If the weather is nice, or there's a conference or some other event going on nearby, we'll be completely booked. In the middle of summer, not so much. It's pretty full right now. Everybody and their cousin wants to travel to ring in the new year, so we tend to be pretty busy the first couple months. The parking lot was indeed fairly crowded, she noted as they pulled in, and even she knew enough to see that most of these cars were more expensive than any her family had ever owned. By a lot. Harry maneuvered the car into a spot near the lodge marked Manager, parked, and turned off the car. He smiled at her. All right. Ready for the grand tour? Or would you rather settle in first? She knew she would be staying at the lodge, but hadn't thought about what her accommodations would actually be. Surely not one of the valuable rentable rooms. Perhaps one of those that were technically closed for construction? Her curiosity flared. If we can just get my luggage put away, I'll take the tour if that's all right. Certainly. I love showing the place off. With another smile that put crinkles around his dark eyes, he opened his door, exited the car, and scurried to the trunk to get her bags. She paused for a single deep breath before following him into the crisp February air. He insisted on carrying her suitcase and bag, despite her offer to relieve him of them, and he led her down a stone path to the side of Southeaster Lodge. As soon as they walked through the rustic wooden door, a wave of warmth hit her from a traditional fireplace, mixing with the scents of cedar and coffee and a palette of soft, comforting colors. They were in what appeared to be a lobby or common area, fire roaring on one end of the room, soft green and blue chairs and sofas scattered throughout, and fine braided rugs adorning the wood floor. Through a huge doorway framed by smooth dark brown logs, she spied several wooden tables surrounded by wooden chairs, most of which were occupied by softly chattering guests. Steam rose from bowls and cups at the diners' places. A girl about Katy's age with a sleek bob and high-heeled boots turned and met her eyes, then gave a friendly smile before turning back to conversation with a blonde in the seat next to her. "This way, milady," said Harry, gesturing in the direction opposite the dining room, and with a last look at the two girls, she turned to follow him down a hallway next to the fireplace. A long, soft-braided rug ran the length of the corridor, and as they walked, Katy eyed the doors on either side of the hall. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then door number 5 was at the end of the way. Rather than turning into any of these, Harry pivoted towards a set of doors after door number 4 that went down below the lodge. Katy continued to follow him down and then into another hall that contained unmarked doors. When they reached the door at the very end of this hall, Harry reached to open it, saying, "I hope you won't mind us sticking you in the cellar." The words gave Katy a chill of apprehension, but the room that met her eyes was perfectly civilized, even beautiful. A full-sized bed, covered by a rich blue quilt and illuminated by a nearby lamp, invited her almost irresistibly to rest. A desk stood against another wall. A comfy chair rested in one corner, also near a lamp, and another braided rug, this one burgundy, covered much of the floor. "These rugs are so beautiful," Katy said as Harry put her bags down at the foot of the bed. He stiffened just a little, only noticeable because she was watching him so intently, but his voice sounded no different as he said, "Thank you. My mother made them." "By hand?" Katy's eyes widened, and she looked closer at the rug beneath her feet. It was so meticulously woven, so perfectly put together, and like all the others she'd seen, so uniquely fitted to its space. "Yes." He straightened and smiled at her, giving her courage to continue prodding. "I didn't realize your mother was involved with the lodge, too." "Was." His smile turned sober. "She actually passed away several years ago." Katy froze. "Oh, I'm sorry." What was one supposed to say to this? Should she ask more? Just stop talking now? "Yes. Well." He moved back towards the door, then turned to face her again. "Do you want me to go ahead and show you around? Or do your travels necessitate a time of rest?" She put a smile on her face. "Maybe just a few minutes to sit down. It's strange how tiring sitting all day on a bus can be." "Strange indeed. But take all the time you need. There's dinner set aside for you in the kitchen, and after that you can probably find me at the front desk whenever you're ready for that tour." With a nod of his head, he left, closing the door behind him. In the silence, she looked again at the intricate, round burgundy rug spanning the floor. If she were Catherine Morland, she would doubtless surmise that the woman who had crafted them had been murdered by her husband, or perhaps that she was locked away in the unused wing of the lodge, gone mad with anguish and abuse. She smiled, but the smile vanished quickly. Something didn't have to be melodramatic to be a tragedy, or even to be a mystery. Chapter 3. Once she dropped into the comfortable chair in her cozy room, she found it harder than expected to get back up. When she finally did, creeping up the stairs and down the hall of rooms to the lobby again, she found several couches and chairs occupied by people chatting, scrolling phones, or reading, but the dining room beyond stood empty. The kitchen. Her dinner was in the kitchen, Harry had said. Where was that exactly? "You look lost," said a voice at her elbow. She turned to see the high-heeled girl with the bob smiling at her with lips a shade perfectly complementing her blue eyes. "Oh, I was just looking for the kitchen," she said, then wondered whether she ought to have answered so honestly. How much was it acceptable to associate with the guests? The girl lifted her arm and pointed a manicured finger towards the dining room. "If you go all the way through there, the door to the kitchen is on your right." "Thank you." Katy was about to follow the directions, but the girl's voice stopped her again. "I don't think they're still serving, though. Dinner ends at 7. She felt her cheeks flush. "Oh, I'm not a guest. I work here. I'm going to work here. I just arrived." "How exciting!" was the unexpected response. "You'll get to know this place much better than I do then. And I've stayed here at least once a year since I was 8 years old. Is my family obsessed? Maybe." She laughed, more of a giggle than anything else. "It must be a good place for you to keep coming back," Katy observed. "Oh, just the best. I love a good cozy atmosphere, don't you? But I'm keeping you from dinner, aren't I?" "It's okay. Thank you for directing me." "Any time. And I'm sure I'll be seeing more of you. We're here for at least 2 weeks." 2 weeks at an expensive hotel? Katy's family rarely even took vacations, and when they did, they would crowd into one cheap room for the few days of their stay. But before she could say anything, the girl had flown back towards the fireplace, where she settled next to her blonde friend, who sat on a love seat nearby. Katy made her way through the quiet dining room, wondering whether it would be part of her job to clean it after meals. She found the kitchen door right where the girl had told her it would be, and nudged it open. At first she thought that this room, too, was empty, but a middle-aged man in a white uniform stood at the sink, washing an enormous pot with a high-pressure water sprayer. For a moment she just watched him, then she said, "Hello?" He turned abruptly, revealing a hairline that had definitely begun to recede and eyes that squinted behind wire-rimmed glasses. "I'm going to have to ask you to— Wait, are you the new girl? Did Harry send you?" She stepped through the door, unsure what to do with her hands. She settled on clasping them behind her back. "Yes, Harry sent me to get dinner, I think. I'm Katy Meyer." "You think he sent you, or you think you're here for dinner?" The man grinned, showing teeth that weren't quite straight. "Only teasing you. I've got a meal saved. There." He pointed to a covered tray on the counter next to her. "Shouldn't have cooled too much. I expected you sooner." "I'm sorry." "Your loss if it's cold." He turned back to the sink and his pot and his sprayer and went to work as though the exchange had not even taken place. "Thank you. Goodbye, then." She picked up the tray with both hands and gripped it tightly. The man kept washing. She backed through the door, looked around the empty tables, and selected the one closest to the kitchen door. Uncovering the tray revealed a plate of steak, mashed potatoes, and steamed veggies that made her mouth water. She hadn't realized until then how hungry she was. As she ate, she looked around the room at the decor that lined the walls. Antlers, paintings of rolling hills and autumn trees, a plank of wood painted with the words, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom." Of knowledge, she mentally corrected the quotation, though she knew that in context the knowledge spoken of was indeed wisdom. Who had painted this saying, she wondered? Had the deceased Mrs. Thompson perhaps done that too? A glance at the smooth wood floor revealed that this was the first room she had seen in the entire place that did not have a rug. "Holmes is an evil genius." She jumped at the unexpected voice and looked up to see Harry standing in a doorway on the wall adjacent to the kitchen. "Oh, what?" "Not the fictional detective," he said, stepping through into the room. "I mean, that may be true of him too, but I meant our chef, Barnaby Holmes." "Oh." Katy looked down at her plate, which was nearly empty. It really was delicious. "Hopefully you didn't run afoul of his temper." "Not at all. Nothing worse than a little teasing and—" She searched for the word. "Peculiarity? No, let me take that," he said as she stood and reached for her food tray. He picked it up, covering the empty dishes again as he did so. "Just let me put these in the sink and I'll be right back." He vanished through the kitchen door, leaving Katy to wait. When he reappeared, he rubbed his hands together. "Now, if you're ready, Miss Meyer." "Katy is just fine," she said. "All right, Katy, follow me." First he led her back the way he'd come to the front desk, and she found that the lobby curved around the dining room, making it accessible from there as well. From the lobby he led her down 3 more hallways lined with bedrooms, doors numbered 6 through 20. "You won't need to clean the kitchen or the dining room. Holmes's staff does that. But you will need to do whatever is needed in the hallways and the lobby, mostly just a little vacuuming and dusting unless there is some kind of spill or other accident. The main work is in the rooms. Here." He stopped at room 20 and pulled a key card from his pocket. "You should have seen the uproar when we switched to these from real keys a few years back." He pushed the card into the slot above the door handle, waited until a green light appeared, then pushed the door open. "Nobody's in this one, so I can give you the basics." The room inside was more of what Katy had already seen. Wood floors, wood paneling, braided rug, peaceful paintings, cozy seating area. It was like an upgraded version of her own basement room, bed bigger, quilt newer, and complete with a window that displayed distant, hazy blue hills and cedar trees. "Mrs. Allen said you had experience cleaning," he said as she surveyed the room. Had she? And if she had, was it strictly true? "Not professionally," she confessed, "but I'm the oldest of 5 children, so I've done a lot of it just at home. My mother pretty much turned over the housework to me." 5? Now that I can't imagine. "You don't have siblings?" She stopped her perusal of the room to look back at his face. "Just one, a sister, who will be here later in the week to give you better instructions than I can." He grinned. "The cleaning isn't exactly my domain, but essentially during a guest's stay you'll change their sheets and towels and do any light cleaning that's needed unless they don't want it. Then there will be a more deep clean after someone checks out. I'll show you the supply closet and you can let me know if you need anything that isn't there." It certainly sounded straightforward enough. "Thank you. I can do that." "Thanks for what? I mean, I am doing you a tremendous favor by giving you instructions and expectations for your job." Katy laughed. "You are, actually. But maybe I should be thanking your father for trusting me with the job when I have no resume. Is he here?" The shadow passed over Harry's face again, just for a moment. "I think he's around here somewhere. He's usually busy in the evenings." She definitely hadn't imagined the pause in his last sentence. General Thompson might not have murdered his wife or locked her on the premises, but there certainly was something strange going on. Harry shook his head as if to shake the seriousness away, and it seemed to work because he smiled. "Come along and I'll show you the wondrous world of cleaning supplies." And he led her back down the hallway. The next morning she awoke early to her alarm and rushed to turn off the beeping before it bothered anyone. Of course, surely a hotel would have thick enough walls and floors that people wouldn't hear one another's alarms through them, but she didn't want to risk it, especially on her first day. She hurried to get dressed. Harry had said that there was no uniform or anything like that, and that she should simply dress with good taste and common sense. She wasn't sure what that meant or whether any two people even had the same idea of what constituted good taste and common sense, but she did her best by putting on a pair of blue jeans and a conservative navy button-down blouse. Then she braided her hair and carefully fastened on the cleaning staff pin that Harry had handed her before he said good night. Then, with a hurried prayer, she made her way upstairs and into the kitchen. Holmes and his 3 assistants were already hustling when she opened the kitchen door, flooding the dark room with white kitchen light. She hesitated in the doorway, not wanting to interrupt, but the chef happened to turn and see her at that moment. He tilted his balding head towards the counter to her right. "There you go." A covered tray sat there, and she picked it up. "Thank you," she called, but was ignored. She backed out and into the dining room, where she ate her bacon and eggs in the dark, fearing to turn on the lights. After she'd eaten alone in the silence, she glanced at her watch. It was still barely past 7, and she wasn't supposed to start work until 8. Better eager and early than lazy and late, she figured, and this just meant a little time to kill. And, as everyone knew, the best way to kill time was to read a book. She went back through the lobby, intending to return to her room, but she stopped in the middle of the warm, inviting space. Nobody was here. Surely it would be all right for her to curl up in a chair by the fire and read out the time. She'd have to go all the way back to her room to get her book, though. Or would she? With a glance in both directions, she darted towards the bookshelf by the fireplace and skimmed its shelves, expecting the kind of uninteresting and vulgar bestsellers one found in airport bookstores. Instead, a wealth of classic tomes greeted her, including, yes, Northanger Abbey. It was fate, or Providence, as her father would say. She stood on her toes to retrieve the book from the shelf that was just a little above her height, then snuggled into the soft green chair next to her and began flipping through pages to find her place. She found it easily and immersed herself, emerging from the story every so often to check her watch. "Is that a good one?" Katy jumped at the sound of a voice next to her and looked to see the same bob-haired girl she'd spoken with the evening before. She looked down at the book, momentarily disoriented. A good one? Oh, this. Yes, it's my favorite. The girl plopped into the matching chair across from Katy's. You intrigue me. Most readers can't seem to pick a favorite book to save their lives. It is difficult, Katy admitted. She closed the book. And my answer has changed at times, so perhaps I should call it my current favorite. And it is? The girl prompted. Oh, I'm sorry. She held up the book. Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen. Have you read it? That one I haven't gotten to yet. I'm actually ashamed to say I haven't read a lot of Austen myself. Did you get that from the shelf? Are all her books here? The girl glanced at the shelf behind Katy. Most of them, I think. I didn't see Sense and Sensibility. With another look at her watch, Katy rose and stepped to the shelf to return the book. That one I have read, and while I can't claim to have a favorite, it's a definite top 10. The girl stood along with Katy, and as Katy faced her, she saw the girl's eyes dart to the staff badge, then back to Katy's face. She smiled and held out her hand. I'm Amelia, and I apologize if I'm keeping you from your work. Katy shook her hand, wondering whether the other girl was trying to be polite or condescending. I'm Katy, and no, though I should get to it probably. Good luck on your first day. I'll see you around. Amelia smiled a bright, warm smile, and Katy decided that it had been politeness on her part after all. Thank you. Then Katy memorized her place in the book, returned it to the shelf, and went to begin cleaning. All but 3 of the available rooms were occupied, and only 2 of those had the green Do Not Disturb signs hanging on their doorknobs, so there was plenty to keep Katy occupied all morning. By her lunchtime, which was staggered a little after lunch was served to the guests, she had cleaned all but 4 of the rooms. How's it going? Harry asked, stopping by her table as she ate a sandwich and chips in the otherwise empty dining room. She swallowed and took a drink before answering. I think it's going well. I'm nearly done with the rooms. After I finish those and do the hallways, what should I do? Report to you? No, you can go ahead and take off for the day once you've finished. We'll probably eventually have extra tasks, but it's your first day. You should relax and celebrate a job well done. He smiled and she smiled back. We do have a couple guests checking out tomorrow, so there will be extra work then. I look forward to it, she said. He raised his eyebrows. Now, I think you really mean that. Why wouldn't I? She hurried the last bites of sandwich into her mouth. Most people don't exactly look forward to their work. She wasn't sure what to say to this, so she simply pushed back her chair and picked up her dishes. Thanks for checking in. My pleasure. And do you really mean that? As soon as the words left her lips, she wished she could take them back. It came out sounding much more flirtatious than it had in her head. Why wouldn't I? With another grin, he nodded at her and went back to the front desk. And as she carried her plate and glass into the kitchen, she felt her heart beat a little faster than it had before. Why not? He was nice. He was handsome. He was considerate and clever. The only thing she wasn't sure about was whether he would have any interest in a plain, awkward girl like herself. Chapter 4. Sure enough, the remaining rooms only took an hour, and then Katy moved on to making sure the 4 hallways were clean. She dusted picture frames, vacuumed the rugs, swept the wood floors thoroughly, wiped down doors and doorknobs. Then, after she'd finished with those hallways, she looked hesitantly at the doorway leading to the 5th hall. Was she supposed to clean that one as well? An incongruous sheet of plastic bearing the word "Caution" over and over had been nailed to the top and swept down to the floor, effectively blocking all view of the corridor. She knew the rooms weren't being used, and she wasn't expected to clean them, but Harry hadn't made it clear whether the hallway itself was a part of her duties. Shouldn't she assume it was? After all, unused areas still gathered dust. She looked over both shoulders, not sure why she felt the need to do so, before lifting the plastic and darting inside to the unlit hall, duster clutched in hand. 5 doors labeled 21 through 25 ran down the length of the space. Other than the lack of light and the different numbers, it looked just like the other hallways. It was so dark and quiet. Katy shivered. She reached the duster towards a framed picture of a snowy forest.
"What are you doing here?"
She literally jumped, then whirled around to face the source of the voice. A tall, thin man was closing door number 25, and in the dimness of the hall she could just make out his gray hair and the wrinkles in his gray sports jacket and slacks and his white shirt. The stiff, disciplined posture and confident stride gave her a clue as to who it was. I was just cleaning, sir." He marched closer to her, uncomfortably close, and clasped his hands behind his back.
"And who instructed you to do so?"
Nobody, sir. I was told to clean the halls, and I thought—" He looked past her towards the sheet of plastic that covered the doorway back to the lobby.
"I should have known Harry wouldn't make the parameters clear."
Looking back at her, eyes peering at her face, he said,
"I suppose you're the new cleaning girl."
"Yes, sir."
"I'm General Thompson. I certainly appreciate your work, but I must insist that you do not visit this wing of the lodge. It's off limits."
Katy tried to silence the voices in her head that begged to know why. "Yes, sir. I apologize." The man reshaped his expression into a smile, though the change appeared forced.
"Apology accepted. It's just that this area isn't safe. Not since the fire. It's going to be remodeled soon."
"I understand, sir. Thank you." She wasn't quite sure what she was thanking him for, but it felt like the right thing to say. Feeling an uncomfortable aversion to turning her back to the man, she backed towards the entrance to the hall. He made no move to follow her and said nothing else as he watched her go. At last she reached the sheet of plastic and ducked past it, then turned and darted to put her cleaning supplies away, heart pounding. The lobby, she noted as she moved through it, was no longer empty. A few guests congregated on couches, chatting or by the fire reading, and as she made her way towards the hallway that contained the supply closet, she caught sight of Amelia in an overstuffed chair, book in hand, watching her. Katy's heart didn't stop racing until she had settled her duster, broom, and vacuum in the supply closet in their proper places, then closed and locked the closet door behind her. When she turned away from the closet, she found Amelia standing there. "So what's down there?" the girl asked with a grin. For a moment, Katy was confused. Then she looked back towards the lobby. "What's down there?" she echoed stupidly. "In the forbidden place." Amelia raised her eyebrows and leaned forward as though ready to share in a piece of gossip. "I'm always so curious." "It's nothing. Just a dark, empty hall." Katy moved past the other girl, ready to get off her feet and enjoy some well-earned reading time. "Oh, come on." Amelia followed her to the bookshelf by the fireplace. "We all want to know what's going on back there." Katy reached for the copy of Northanger Abbey that she'd been reading that morning. Apparently it needs to be renovated. Something about a fire. She was surprised when Amelia grasped her arm and spoke close to her ear, nearly whispering, "Katy, that fire was 7 years ago." Book in hand, Katy stared at the other girl. Amelia nodded, eyes wide. "I know." "And it still hasn't been renovated?" "Not as far as I can tell, or any of the other people I've talked to who come here often. My friend Olivia and I were discussing it just this morning." Katy looked back towards the sheet of plastic which had stilled. "Have you ever tried to explore it?" "Once, a couple winters ago. That General Thompson who owns the place stopped me. Almost made me jump out of my skin." "The same thing happened to me." Forgetting her book, Katy settled down on a nearby love seat, making room next to her for Amelia. "He ordered me never to come back." "Sounds to me like some Jane Eyre level stuff is going on back there. Crazy relatives locked away, maybe?" Katy laughed. "Don't you think someone would have heard something by now if that was the case?" "I don't know. It depends." Katy shook her head, but her mind began spinning in various directions. The idea of crazy relatives and murdered wives might be overly melodramatic, yes, but there were such things as crimes. There were such things as secrets. And it was impossible to deny that General Thompson very much did not want his guests or even staff entering the forbidden place, as Amelia called it. Well then, what's your theory? The girl asked, bobbed hair haloed by the glow of the fire behind her. Katy looked back towards the empty wing again, remembering the look on the general's face as he had warned her to stay away. "This area isn't safe," he'd said. Why exactly wasn't it? Katy slept hard that night and woke up early the next morning to a crisp chill in the air around her. She pulled the soft quilt up under her chin and stared at the wooden ceiling above her, mentally tracing the natural grain of each plank. Day 2 of her job, and already she had mixed feelings about it. She had enjoyed the work and felt like she did it well. She had enjoyed talking with Amelia and looked forward to more conversations with her new friend. She enjoyed the food. And Harry, well, Harry wasn't too hard to enjoy being around either. Her cheeks warmed and she pulled her head under the quilt as though the furniture in the room would judge her for the blush. She was, however, beginning to wonder about this place. She couldn't get that look on General Thompson's face out of her head, the stern tilt of his eyebrows as he told her to stay away from that wing of the lodge. Amelia was right. It wasn't unreasonable to guess he was hiding something, but what could it be? Maybe he had some sort of stolen property hidden back there. She could discover the truth and reveal it to the police. She pulled her head out from under the covers with a rueful smile. This wasn't television. This was real life, and she wasn't being paid to speculate about her boss's secrets, but to clean, which meant she needed to leave the warm, comfortable bed and get ready for the day. She met Harry on her way through the unoccupied lobby to get her breakfast, his curls brushed neatly back, white shirt pressed under his jacket, easy smile making her heart flutter again. "Good morning. And how did you feel your first day went?" "I think a better question is how you felt it went," she replied, falling into step with him. "An excellent point of view. And as far as I can tell, it went well. No complaints from guests, nothing overly dirty that I could see. Now, there are a couple of rooms emptying today that you'll need to deep clean." He glanced at his watch as they entered the dim dining room. Maybe I can walk you through that after lunch? I imagine you can stay busy until then, and I should have some time this afternoon." "Sounds good, thank you." He nodded at her, then rushed off towards the front desk area. She watched him leave, then saw him stop on the other side of the doorway, exclaim something she couldn't hear, and rush in the direction of the lodge's front door. A moment later, he reappeared with his arm around the shoulders of a girl who looked a year or two older than Katy, a slender, curly-headed girl in a stylish knit dress, leather boots, and dangling hoop earrings. The girl happened to turn her head as the pair passed the doorway, and she met Katy's eyes and smiled. Katy smiled back, trying to keep her heart from sinking quite all the way down to the floor. Of course he had a girlfriend. Why would she have thought otherwise? And anyway, even if he hadn't, why would he have been interested in a nobody like her? Better to find out now before she let her heart get too involved anyway, she assured herself, though as she went to get her breakfast, she knew that she didn't quite believe it. Chapter 5. That morning dragged a bit more than the previous one had, despite Katy's best efforts to get her mind off Harry and his girlfriend. Every time she would start to really focus on her work, the image of him with his arm around the young lady leapt back into her mind, causing her heart to, once again, sink a little. Every time this happened, she paused to scold herself. She had no claim on him whatsoever. She hadn't even known him 2 full days, and she didn't believe in love at first sight. Did she? She'd never felt her heart do quite what it did around him before. But no. Again, she told herself better to know now before she got too enamored. When her lunchtime finally rolled around, she went to grab her food from a red-faced chef Holmes, who muttered, "I hope you appreciate it more than the rest of that crowd did." Then she carried her tray to the table near the kitchen door that she already considered her official spot. Unlike any of her other meals, though, she didn't eat this one alone. When she had only taken 2 bites of the truly excellent roast beef sandwich, she heard a voice calling, "Hey there!" She turned towards the dining room doorway to see Amelia grinning and stepping towards her, high-heeled boots clicking against the wooden floor. You don't mind if I join you, do you? She asked, sliding into a seat across from Katy before permission was given. Not at all, Katy smiled. Do you need food? Or did you eat yet? We just got back from the cutest little bistro down the street. I have absolutely got to take you sometime. It seriously feels like you just stepped into the 1950s. The inclusion warmed Katy's sunken heart. It sounds nice. Amelia leaned forward, propping her elbows on the table. So what's eating you? Katy felt her cheeks pink yet again. Eating me? Come on. Some kind of sadness is written all over your face. Cheeks burning hotter, Katy tried to hide behind her glass of water, tilting it so that she got a too big drink and nearly choked. Is it that obvious? Don't tell me. It's our resident manager. Amelia leaned back in her chair and pressed her hand dramatically to her heart. Manager? Why would you think... Oh, Mr. Harry Thompson is quite the charmer. You wouldn't be the first to fall prey to his wit and good looks. This didn't make Katy feel any better or less embarrassed. Do you mean you... No, I don't really go for the super responsible type, Amelia said with another grin. I prefer a man with a little more edge myself. I just didn't realize he was with someone, Katy explained. With someone? Amelia leaned forward again. I didn't know. How did you find out? Who is she? I just saw him with her this morning. I don't know anything really. He just met her at the door and walked in with his arm around her. She has really curly hair. To Katy's surprise, Amelia sat back and laughed. Brunette? Skinny and insanely well-dressed? Yes, how did you know? That's only Beth, you dear misinformed thing. Katy's mouth was too full of sandwich to ask who only Beth was, but Amelia answered anyway. Beth Thompson, General Thompson's daughter. She works here too. I think she was off on a business trip. Oh. And the single syllable seemed imbued with all the foolishness she felt she had displayed. Amelia laughed again, then put her hand on Katy's arm. Don't worry. I would have assumed the same thing. We're all a little silly when we're in love. Katy sat up straighter. Oh, I'm not... Katy, seriously. Amelia fluttered her eyelashes. I've never seen someone so down about a man allegedly having a girlfriend. You've got it bad. Katy studied the last crust of her sandwich intently. I hardly know him. What does that have to do with anything? Amelia placed her hand on her heart again. With the right person, it can take only moments to truly know who someone is. Sense and sensibility, said Katy with a smile. What now? Amelia blinked. It sounded like you got that from Sense and Sensibility. You didn't? Not intentionally. Maybe it's been too long since I read that one. Did I quote it? Katy smiled and pushed her empty plate away. Not exactly. The complete quote talks about how for some people 7 years is not long enough to get to know them, but for others 7 minutes is enough. How about that? Amelia stood, pushing her chair back as she did. I'm guessing you still have work to do? As Katy nodded, she saw a form moving towards their table from behind Amelia and craned her neck to see who it was. This made Amelia look over her shoulder, and they both saw Beth Thompson, curls bouncing with each step. Amelia looked towards Katy again and raised her eyebrows before turning back to Beth and speaking with a smile in her voice. Beth, so good to see you again. The girl nodded, but her smile seemed forced to Katy. Amelia, I assume you're well? Never better. Well, I'll leave you two to discuss business. And Amelia walked away without another word to Katy. Beth glanced after her before moving closer to the table and smiling a warmer smile at Katy herself. Katy Meyer? Katy stood, lifting her dishes as she did so. Yes, ma'am. Yes, I'm Katy. I'm Beth. I help manage the lodge. Here, let me take those for you. She reached for Katy's dishes, but Katy didn't relinquish them. That's okay, she said. I'll wash them. Oh, don't bother with that. That's what we pay a dishwasher for. Just put them in the sink. Harry sent me to walk you through cleaning after checkouts. Okay. Katy was annoyed at the slight sinking of her heart with the realization that Harry himself would not be the one to show her this, but Beth seemed nice enough. And maybe she could learn something from her. Something about her brother, or her father, or the forbidden areas of the lodge. She darted into the dim, empty kitchen, placed her dishes carefully in the sink and her tray on the stack near the door, then returned to where Beth was twirling a curl in her fingers. "Ready?" the girl asked. Katy nodded and followed her out of the dining room, through the lobby, and down a hallway to room 8. Beth unlocked the door and opened it. "You haven't done a checkout yet, correct?" Beth asked, gesturing to the unmade beds, full trash can, and crumbs on the floor. "That's right." "Okay. I'm sure it won't be anything too revolutionary. Harry says you've done a great job with the other tasks." With this praise ringing pleasantly in her ears, Katy followed Beth through the room, taking mental note of all the instructions she was given. "You look tired." It was Saturday, 1 full week after she'd arrived at Southeaster Lodge, and the words did not surprise her. Amelia had invited her to bundle up and take a walk down the trails around the lodge, and despite her long day, Katy gratefully accepted. It would be nice to get some fresh, if cold, air along with what was left of the day's sunshine. 3 people checked out today, Katy explained, and there was more laundry than usual. Amelia looked off into the distance, towards the colors of sunset ahead through the cedar trees. "You feel it's going well, though?" Katy hesitated before answering. Did she? Her first instinct was to give a resounding yes. It might be a lot of work, but it was peaceful and simple, and she enjoyed it. Everyone was nice to her, and her very first official paycheck, which she had received yesterday, had given her the most invigorating satisfaction and sense of golden opportunity. Her work had quite literally paid off. The situation, however, was not without its downsides. The first few days she had been too busy to think much about her family. The 5th day she had called her mother, feeling guilty for her neglect, and the conversation had not decreased those feelings. Her mother sounded tired. Should Katy have left her when she knew how much her mother relied on her help? Then there was the situation with Harry. The butterflies in her stomach when she was around him had not abated, but he had given her no reason to think he felt anything for her. He continued to be friendly, polite, and witty, but went no further. Granted, it had only been a week. It was silly to think of him in any way other than as a co-worker. Lastly, she hadn't been able to shake the sense of unease every time she passed the plastic-covered entrance to the forbidden hallway. Since her initial encounter with him, she had only seen General Thompson once. He had emerged from said hall late one night while she was loitering in the lobby with her book, and had crossed the room and left the lodge, seeming oblivious to her presence. "I do think it's going well," she said at last. Amelia nudged her with a suede-clad elbow. "You can't fool me. Spill the beans. Have you had some horrible experience? Perhaps had to clean up blood-stains after some departing guest? Been privy to the sharing of deep, dark secrets?" Katy laughed, and the sound dispersed into the coldness around them. "Nothing like that. But I admit I do keep wondering about that closed-off wing." "Oh, tell me about it." Amelia lowered her voice, though there was no one within earshot. "I've been curious about that for 7 years. I thought with you on the inside I'd have some answers by now." "I'm not exactly on the inside. They don't want me going back there either." "But you're part of the machine that makes the lodge run. You must know something." "Not one single thing. You've been coming here so long, you must know more than I do." "I have my theories." Amelia paused to kick a pine cone off the path in front of her. It bounced out of sight. "But nothing's ever been confirmed." "Theories?" "My favorite currently is counterfeiting." Amelia nodded in a way that made Katy uncertain whether she was serious or not. "Counterfeiting? Money, you mean?" "Oh, yes. Who knows what's hidden in those rooms? It could be those machines they use for printing the stuff." Katy couldn't help a laugh. "And you think General Thompson would have been able to hide something like that from the authorities all these years?" "Why not? People are always coming and going. It could be a good cover. You don't think so?" "I think you read too many thrillers," Katy said. "Maybe, but not all of us can be exclusive classic readers." "To be fair, it's not like classics are much better when it comes to lack of realism." "Maybe, But again, if you don't like my theory, what's yours? Katy paused, taking a moment to study the fading sunset colors. What was her theory? Part of her wondered if Amelia's counterfeiting theory could actually be right. What did she know about the process anyway? Maybe a closed-off area of a bed and breakfast was indeed the perfect cover for such an endeavor. But things like that didn't happen in real life. Did they? We should get back before it's dark, she said at last. Amelia elbowed her again, but obligingly turned back towards the lodge. You are keeping something from me. I just know it, she pouted. Not a single thing. If I find anything out, I promise you'll be the first to know. I better be. And Amelia quickened her pace in the gathering dusk, with Katy following behind. Chapter 6. She flew awake in the darkness, startled by she knew not what. What time was it? She groped for her phone and found it. 5:30. Not quite the middle of the night, but still an unusual time for her to be up. Silence. She laid in it, wondering. Had she heard something? Had that been what woke her? There was a sound. That must have been what pulled her out of sleep. Creaking overhead. One creak, then silence. A moment, then another creak, then nothing. What was directly overhead, anyway? She pushed herself up on her elbows and formulated a map of the lodge in her mind. The stairs to her room began in the fourth hallway, then gradually turned to the right, which should put her bed somewhere below the forbidden corridor. She sat all the way up and then scooted her body backwards until she was able to lean against the sturdy wooden headboard, listening for more creaking but hearing nothing. Amelia was right. Something was going on up there. But what could it be? What could be so sinister that the mysterious general would go to such lengths to hide it, and for so long? She waited, listening, but no more sounds from above met her ears. She laid back down, thinking. Why would the general not have had the damaged areas of his business repaired for the past 7 years? There was procrastination, and there was just plain neglect. There had to be a reason behind it. Something related to the fact that no one was allowed to visit the area. Something related to whatever he was doing sneaking around in there all the time. She thought back over her week of work. Had she ever seen the general actually do anything towards the running of the lodge? Her memory served up images of Harry greeting guests, Harry taking payment and printing invoices, Harry giving instructions. Memories of Beth checking in with lodgers, straightening the bookshelves in the lobby, gently giving Katy corrections the few times they'd been needed. What had she seen their father doing? None of it. Nothing except walking in and out of the plastic-covered doorway to the forbidden hall. What was he doing back there? And again, why would he want to avoid opening up a fifth of his business for potential revenue? Could he have started the fire? She stared at the ceiling where she could just make out the grain of the wood in the darkness. But why? Why would he do this? As she visually traced a knot in the wood, it hit her. Insurance. Could it have something to do with that? She knew there was such a thing as insurance fraud, where someone intentionally stole or damaged their own insured property to collect the money on it. What if that was exactly what the general had done? And what if there was some kind of evidence hidden in that wing, something he was afraid might be found? It was the most plausible idea she'd had or heard yet. There were still, she had to admit, plenty of things that didn't make sense. Could the payout from insurance really balance out the loss of money from not opening up those rooms to guests? And what evidence could still be there after 7 years? Maybe it was time for her to find out the answers to those questions. The next morning, she finished her work quickly, keeping an eye out for Amelia. When she didn't see her, she figured her friend must be out shopping. "You're certainly on top of it this morning," a voice said from outside the closet door while she was inside putting away her cleaning supplies. She turned to see Beth standing in the doorway, curls framing her face, arms crossed, smile friendly. "I'm getting more used to the work," Katy said, returning the smile. "Do you have something else you'd like me to do?" "Oh, no, you're good. I actually wanted to see if you'd like to take a walk. It's sunny out there, and Harry and I were headed out to get a little fresh air if you want to join us. I'm sure you could use some after working with all those cleaning products." Katy felt the familiar fluttering of her heart at Harry's name. Had he asked Beth to invite her? Probably not. Still, a walk would be nice, and so would the company. "Sure, I'd love that, if you're sure it's all right." The two girls exited the closet. "You might want to grab a sweater," Beth suggested as they emerged into the lobby. "It may be sunny, but it's not exactly warm." "Good idea. I'll be right back." As Katy rushed towards her room, Beth called after her, "Just meet us at the beginning of the trail." It only took a moment to hurry down the hall, down the stairs, and to her closet to get her cream cardigan with a hole in one sleeve, pull it on, and rush back upstairs to meet them. When she reached the top of the stairs, she found Amelia just exiting her own room, number 3. "Heading out?" the girl asked with a smile, bobbed hair shining in the overhead light. "Beth and Harry asked me to take a walk with them," Katy said, feeling a little embarrassed at how excited her voice sounded. "Ooh!" Amelia appeared to share her enthusiasm and grabbed Katy's arm when she was within reach. "Good! You can find out more about the big secret." She hadn't yet had an opportunity to share her idea about insurance fraud with Amelia. She'd actually forgotten about the mystery in her excitement, and the reminder made her spirits drop just a little. But all she said was, "Maybe so. I'll talk to you later." Amelia gave a smile and let her go, leaving Katy to continue on her way. She found the Thompsons waiting for her at the opening of the trail on the other side of the lodge's parking lot, Beth in a stylish coat that fit her perfectly, Harry just in his usual gray suit with no added winter garments. He rubbed his hands together and huffed on them as she approached, his breath leaving thin vapor in the air as he blew. Beth smiled. "Thank you for joining us," she said, and Katy couldn't help feeling that she meant it. "Thank you for inviting me," she said, giving Harry another glance. He added his smile to his sister's and said, "Let's get moving. Get the old blood flowing." The three set off along the path, Beth and Katy leading the way side by side, with Harry trailing a few feet behind. It wasn't exactly the arrangement Katy had hoped for, but she accepted it, again feeling grateful for their attention. For a while no one spoke. Katy listened to the thump of their shoes against the pavement, the distant hum of traffic, the occasional bird call in the trees around them. Beth had been right about the weather. It was chilly, but the direct sunlight gave enough warmth that one barely minded the cold. And after a morning of replacing sheets and towels, taking out trash, and dusting a multitude of surfaces, it felt good to simply move one's legs along a pathway in the open air and exist in quietude with friends. If indeed they were friends. She wouldn't necessarily have used the word before, but as the trio made their way through the wintry wood, the aura of companionship was undeniable. "So," she said at last, timid about breaking the silence, but determined to fulfill Amelia's suggestion that she use this time wisely, "I heard you were on a business trip when I got here?" "I just had to pick up some inventory in Houston," Beth explained, voice clear and sweet in the crisp, dry air around them. "I'm not sure why, but sometimes some of our shipments get delayed there, and it's faster for us to go get them than to wait for the issue to be resolved." "I told Dad that we should start ordering from someone else," Harry spoke up from behind them. Katy turned to study his face. It was the first time she had heard him mention his father beyond the brief mention that the man was owner of the lodge, and she wanted to find some awkwardness or pain or something on his face, something that would give her a sense of the situation within the family. But his expression told her nothing. He simply studied the branches of the trees as they passed by. "I know. Hopefully it won't happen again, or if it does, we can make a change." And that was all that either sibling said on the topic. Katy racked her brain for something else she could ask or comment on, something that would allow her to dig for more information without seeming inappropriate or overly curious. Finally, she said, "Your father really seems to trust you both with so much." "Yes," said Beth, "he does." For a moment, Katy thought that was all she would hear on the subject. Then Harry's voice spoke from behind them, tone dry and biting.
"He certainly doesn't always act like it."
"Harry," Beth chided softly.
"Sorry."
And the subject was dropped as quickly as it had been broached. Katy didn't know what to make of the exchange and was too shy to try again, so she simply enjoyed the rest of her walk along with the feeling of camaraderie. When they had reached the lodge again, Beth said, "Have you had a chance to do any shopping? I would love to take you sometime. We have so many lovely places around here." While Amelia had suggested taking her out a few times over the past week, no outing had actually materialized. "No, I haven't yet. That sounds nice." "Let's make plans then. I'll check my schedule and get back with you later tonight."
"And Bethy has the best taste in the hill country, so you'll be the envy of the town," Harry called.
"Harry!" But this time Beth smiled as she scolded him. Katy felt a warmth despite the cold air around her. What a blessing for her, a newcomer, to have so many accepting friends. Again, a sound awoke her much too early. She sat up, thinking for a moment she was back in her little attic bedroom at home, thinking she'd heard one of the little children sneaking down the hall to go to the bathroom. But no, she was in the basement of Southeaster Lodge, and again creaking floorboards announced that someone was in the forbidden wing above her. She listened. No more creaking. For several minutes. She sat and thought and wondered until the wondering was too much to bear. If there was some evidence of wrongdoing, someone needed to know about it. As much as she was growing to love this place and its people, she couldn't stand the gnawing curiosity and, yes, fear about whatever mysterious secrets were being hidden. Something was wrong. Something with the general, with his relationship to his family, with the part of the lodge that he refused to have repaired. After listening a little longer and hearing nothing, Katy pushed herself out of bed, heart beating loudly in her ears. She put on her robe, picked up her phone, and turned on its light to illuminate the way. She slowly opened her bedroom door, trying to avoid any squeaking of the hinges. It opened noiselessly in the dark. She could only see the few feet ahead of her lit by the screen of her phone. Taking a deep breath through her nose, she crept up the stairs. The padding of her fuzzy socks on the steps was the only sound aside from her own breathing. Even the fire in the lobby was out, though a faint gleam came from the other side of the dining room. Of course, someone would still be at the front desk in case of late-night lodgers, and she knew a security guard patrolled the outside of the place once the sun went down. But other than that, no one should be up at this hour. No one except whoever had been creaking overhead and awakened her. She had waited a long time and heard nothing, which led her to believe that whoever it was had retired. But what if that someone was still in there and caught her? What could she say as an excuse for her presence? She could say Beth or Harry had sent her in there the day before, and she'd left something there. Why would they send her? She didn't know. When she reached the plastic cover of the doorway, she hesitated. What if someone did catch her and she got fired? The doorway into independence and opportunity had only just opened before her, and she didn't want it to be slammed in her face now. This consideration brought a new thought to mind. The previous cleaner. Mrs. Allen had told her mother the woman had left to care for an aging mother. But what if there was something more sinister at play? What if she'd been caught ignoring the caution regarding the forbidden hallway and had been forced to leave? It didn't matter. Katy had to know. All her life she'd been waiting for adventure to find her, for mystery and intrigue that mirrored the lives of her favorite heroes and heroines. And here it was, staring her right in the face, right on the other side of a thin, crinkled sheet. There was no turning back now. She hesitated, laid her hand on the plastic, and moved it aside, wincing at the noise it made as she slipped past it and into the dark and dusty hall beyond. Once the cover was still behind her, she listened carefully. Nothing. If the general had been up here, for who else could it have been, He must be gone now. Holding her phone in front of her again, she made her way down the corridor. When she reached the first door on the left, she gripped the handle and turned, adrenaline causing her hand to tremble against the cold metal. But the door was locked. And even if she'd had her card key with her, there were no slots for such technological advancements in this particular door. The switch to electronic locks must have been made since this wing was shut down. She moved to the other side of the hallway and tried that door. Also locked. The same was true of the other doors to the left and right ahead of her, and her heart sank. So much for her grand idea of investigating. When she arrived at the last door at the very end of the hall, she reached half-heartedly for the knob, certain it wouldn't turn. But it did. Heart rate accelerating, she pushed the door inward, bracing herself for whatever fire-starting materials, counterfeiting machinery, or dead bodies might meet her eyes. Instead, all she saw at first was a bedroom, just like the others except obviously damaged. Floor, walls, ceiling, furniture, all blackened and ashy, holes in the ceiling and floor revealing the framing within. Where the handmade rug should have been, there was only blackened, bare wooden floor. She slipped into the room, holding her phone up to illuminate as much of the space as possible. Was this where the fire had started? Stepping as softly as possible, she made her way across the room, moving the light from side to side, searching for anything strange or mysterious. When she reached the blackened and hole-riddled chair near the empty fireplace, she stopped short. The chair was surrounded by bottles. Empty bottles. Bottles Katy was too naive to recognize, but aware enough to understand.
"What are you doing here?"
The voice made her whirl around, heart hammering against her ribs, terror skyrocketing in her mind. Harry stood in the doorway, flashlight in hand, watching her. She heaved a shaky breath, trying desperately to force her mind to work. I thought I heard something, and He stepped towards her, face coming into the light of her phone and becoming clearer in it. He looked sober, frowning, eyes accusatory.
"And you decided the best thing to do was to come and do a little snooping?"
Snooping? No, But she was snooping. He was right. That was exactly the word for it. He looked past her, towards the chair and the bottles.
"What were you expecting to find?" he asked quietly, his tone impossible to interpret.
We thought, it's been so long since anyone was allowed to come here. I thought there must be a reason."
"You thought the reason was something ominous?"
His eyes meeting hers so steadily made it difficult to think straight. "It might be."
"Like what?"
And with those eyes on hers, she couldn't bear to tell him anything but the full truth. "I thought maybe the fire wasn't an accident. Maybe there was Your father might have needed the insurance money. He might not want the place repaired if there was something to hide." And as it all came out of her mouth, it sounded so absurd that she wanted to sink into that blackened floor and disappear. For a moment, Harry just looked at her. Then he said very quietly,
"It didn't occur to you that the reason might simply be a heartbroken man's stubborn grief at the tragic death of his wife?"
Katy looked at the floor and felt hot tears rise in her eyes. "No," she said, knowing the word was barely audible. Rather than Harry's voice chastising her, the next sound she heard was the crinkling of plastic. She looked up to find him pulling a trash bag from the back pocket of his slacks. He shook it open, then moved past her silently and began to fill it with the bottles. He didn't speak until he had cleaned all of them up. Then he stood and faced her again, speaking steadily. "Katy, my mother died as a result of the fire." Katy's heart froze. She burned?
"No, it was afterwards. Smoke inhalation. But my father, he could never get over it. He's been saying he's going to repair these rooms since it happened, saying he's going to turn things around. But instead, he drinks his sorrows away in this room and leaves the business of the lodge to me and Beth. That's the truth. Is it as glamorous and sordid as you were hoping?"
"I wasn't hoping," Katy protested.
"Yes, you were. You were hoping for something exciting, something you might see in a movie. Not just a sad, broken man who lets his children hold things together while he continues to fall apart."
And Katy couldn't answer because she knew that he was right. At last he sighed and slumped his shoulders as though the bag in his hand had become much too heavy.
"Go to bed, Katy."
And she obeyed, but rather than sleeping, she stared for the rest of the night at the wooden ceiling above her. Chapter 7. She had just managed to drift off when her alarm jolted her awake again to get ready for work. Rather than jumping out of bed as usual, she turned off the alarm and stared at the ceiling again. She thought about cleaning the beautiful rooms of the lodge. She thought about chilly, brisk walks in the surrounding nature. She thought about pleasant chats with Amelia, about Harry's smile, about the shopping trip she had planned with Beth. She thought about her family. Why did she think about them so little? When was the last time she had even called home? Home. With a wise, caring mother and a hard-working, loving father who was invested in his family. Maybe they didn't have a prestigious business in a stylish area. Maybe they had to carefully budget their groceries each week. Maybe they even had peanut butter messes now and then. But, cliché as it sounded, they had each other. And for the first time, she felt homesick. She turned on her side and saw her weathered copy of Northanger Abbey on her bedside table. She really had been every bit as foolish as Catherine, hadn't she? Falling for a boy who would never care for her after the shame he'd caught her in, prizing something new and different and independent over what she'd had right in front of her all her life. For just a moment she imagined bringing Harry home to her family. Imagined him sitting at the table between Matilda and Peter, chatting with her father, thanking her mother for the food, playing a game with Amy and David and herself after the meal. Despite his expensive suit, he fit into the setting perfectly, as though he'd always been there. But no, she'd have to set those thoughts aside. It was time to get ready for work. After she called for a brief chat with her mother. "Hello?" her mother's voice said when she answered, sounding, as always, somehow both bright and tired. "Is everything okay?" "Yes, everything's just fine. I'm sorry I haven't called." "That's okay, babe. I know you've been busy. But it's going well?" Katy thought back over the past couple weeks and all they had entailed, and all she said was, "Yeah, it's going well." She worked quietly all morning, avoiding interactions with anyone around her. Focusing on each task helped. Gathering towels, shining mirrors, making beds, dusting frames. She was able to fixate on each part of the job rather than too intently on the thoughts still swirling in her mind. When she finished, she made her way to the kitchen rather than hanging out in the common areas or returning to her room. She wanted something to do, but she didn't want to have to socialize, not while the humiliation of the night before still weighed on her so heavily. In the kitchen, she found Chef Holmes alone, just beginning the lunch preparations by slicing bread with practiced dexterity. He turned towards her when she came in and raised his eyebrows. "What, you already looking for lunch? Don't you know it's only 11? "I know. I finished my work and thought you might need help." He looked at her, the overhead light making the bald top of his head shiny. "So you're saying you're looking for more work? Who raised you?" Katy didn't know how to answer this, so she just shrugged. He shrugged back and returned to his slicing. "You can start spreading these with mayonnaise. Just wash your hands first, like a civilized person." She washed her hands in the industrial sink, dried them, and retrieved a jar of mayo to use on the sandwiches. Again, the busy monotony helped her mood. She just picked up a slice, dipped her knife in the jar, spread a thin layer, and put the bread down again. Soon the other kitchen helpers arrived, and rather than be in the way of the food preparation, she retired to the sink and washed dishes. Once the lunch was finished and served, Holmes turned to her, wiping his forehead with a towel. "Tell Harry to watch it. I might swipe you from the cleaning staff." She tried to smile, but the mention of Harry's name made all the shame rush back to her, and she couldn't quite get her lips to do her bidding. "I'm glad to help." The man jerked his thumb at a plate on the counter nearby. "There's yours. Go ahead." She picked up the plate that held a sandwich, chips, and carrot sticks and peered out into the dining room. Most of the tables were occupied by chatting visitors. She spotted Amelia at a table at the far wall, along with the blonde girl Katy had often seen her with. "Could I just eat it in here?" she asked, looking at the chef hopefully. "Certainly not. There's an entire room designated just for dining. Go on." Pinching her lips together, she slipped out of the kitchen and darted to a table in the corner, as far away from other diners as she could get. She couldn't avoid her fellow lodgers forever. She knew that. And she certainly would have to face Harry again, since he was technically her boss. She just couldn't do it quite yet. Not until the burning of shame in her stomach had time to subside. As she quietly finished her sandwich, she saw Beth walking towards her and braced herself. Of course Harry would have told her, and of course Beth would be upset. Rightly so. What was she coming to say? To berate Katy for her lack of charity? To tell her that any budding friendship between them was a thing of history? But Beth's expression didn't appear angry or sad. She smiled, her usual warm but demure smile. Maybe Harry hadn't had time to talk to her yet. The two were indeed busy. "There you are." She leaned on the back of the chair opposite Katy. "I'm sorry I didn't get back with you sooner about a time, but I'm available this afternoon if you wanted to go shopping." "Oh, Katy hesitated. "Of course, if you have other plans." No, I don't have anything else going on. I wasn't—" She found herself unable to meet Beth's eyes, and she looked down to study her carrots intently. The silence between them grew uncomfortable. After a moment, she heard the other chair slide across the wooden floor and looked up to see Beth settling into it. For another moment, Beth said nothing. Then she leaned across and spoke quietly. "Are you all right, Katy? Is anything wrong?" Katy looked down again and picked up one of the carrots. It was colder than she expected. "I figured Harry would have told you." To her surprise, Beth reached across the table and put her warm hand on top of Katy's. She looked up to see the other girl smiling again. "About finding you in the room last night?" So he had told her. "I'm sorry. I really shouldn't have been there." "It's okay. I understand. Anyone would be curious about the situation. It's not normal." "You're not disappointed in me?" "Disappointed in you?" Beth drew her hand back. "I don't think I have any reason to be." "Harry seemed like he was." Beth shook her head. "He's not, honestly. He understands. It was her turn to drop her gaze to the table. "Neither of us are proud about the way things are with our father. It's not easy, and Harry can be sensitive about it. And that can make him a bit stern. But believe me, Katy, it's not you he's disappointed in." Katy bit into her carrot and chewed it, processing all of this. "So, all that said," Beth looked up, smiling, eyes just a shade watery, "do you have time for some shopping?" At last, Katy smiled back, mind refilling with thoughts of the avenues open to her now that she had money of her own. "I do. I'd love to go." "Good." Beth stood, scooting her chair back as she went. "I'll pull my car up in front and you can meet me there." The sun neared the horizon when Beth pulled back into the lodge parking lot that evening, and Katy's lap was full of bags from their afternoon of shopping. She'd known that Beth had great taste just by the way she dressed and the way she decorated the lodge, but she'd been surprised at the sensitivity her friend showed in steering her towards the best deals and the most affordable sales. She'd been able to find several lovely additions for her plain wardrobe without putting too big a hole in her salary. Once the car was parked, Beth leaned back, looked out her window towards the setting sun, and said nothing for a few minutes. "Thank you for taking me out," Katy said at last, voice elevated just slightly to be heard clearly over the car's heater. "My pleasure." The girl turned to her and smiled, sunset rays creating a glow around her brown curls. "I wanted to say, Katy, would you mind using discretion about the circumstances with Dad? I'm not asking you to tell no one, not trying to burden you, nothing like that. It's just that we already lose business every year by keeping those rooms locked up. And I feel like if rumors got around online or anything about just the way things are, it would really keep more people away." "Oh, of course." The shame of the morning crept a tendril back into her heart. "I wouldn't say anything. I'm sorry I even— No, you really don't need to be sorry. And I don't want you to feel trapped by all this. Honestly, I understand if you don't want to work here anymore." "I do," Katy reassured quickly. "I love it here." Beth's smile softened, and she looked out the window again. "It is beautiful, isn't it?" They both watched the sun dip beneath the trees, then Beth straightened. "Well, shall we get inside and grab our dinner before Holmes gets grumpy about saving it?" Katy laughed and lifted her packages. Beth turned off the car, and the two emerged into the chilly evening air and made their way to the front door of the lodge. Harry was at the front desk when they arrived, darting from one end of it to another, tapping on the computer keyboard, then rifling through papers. He looked up when the doors opened. "There you are!" he exclaimed, and rushed towards his sister, seeming not to notice Katy. "The stupid order of toiletries got held up in Houston. Again." Beth groaned. "We need to take the initiative to switch companies." "Definitely. But in the meantime, I'm going to run down there tonight so I can get it straightened out first thing in the morning. Can you manage here?" "Are you sure you don't want me to go again?" No, you had your turn. You've got to let me have some of the fun." Katy didn't think that a 5-hour drive alone at night to deal with business difficulties sounded all that fun, and Harry's rueful smile indicated that he didn't either. "Fair enough. I can hold down the fort." Beth smiled back, a sad smile, and Katy wondered how long it was since their father had shouldered any responsibility for his business. "Awesome. Thanks, sis." For the first time since they'd entered, he turned to Katy, meeting her eyes with hesitation. He looked back at his sister. "Let me go grab Tina from the kitchen," Beth offered. "She knows how to be a warm body at the desk if we need one." And she hurried into the dining room. Harry looked back at Katy, whose arms were still loaded with shopping bags. "Do you need help with those?" he asked. "Oh, no," she insisted, sliding the handles up her arms and displaying free hands with a smile, though her heart was again racing under the influence of his brown eyes. "I could carry more." To her surprise, he took her right hand in both of his and squeezed it. "I really think you could." For a moment, they just stood looking at each other. "Katy," he said, "I was thinking maybe when I get back—" "Harry!" came Beth's voice from the dining room, tones laced with urgency. Harry let go of her hand. "We'll talk when I return," he said, allowing a brief smile before rushing off. Katy stood where he'd left her in the entry, arms still loaded with packages, hands still feeling the warm pressure of his. Maybe when he got back. What? By the time she had deposited her purchases in her room and returned upstairs, Harry was already gone. Beth met her on the way to the dining room and stopped briefly to say, "Holmes said to tell you he put your dinner on that table by the door that you like. He had to be somewhere." Then she rushed off towards the front desk. Katy made her way to the table in question. She hadn't realized that the chef had noticed it was where she always sat, but sure enough there was a covered tray waiting for her. She ate her meatloaf and potatoes in silence, then took the dishes back into the kitchen and washed them. When exactly would Harry be back? And what had he wanted to say to her? Would he return tomorrow? Or would she have to wait longer? She dried her hands on the linen towel that sat neatly folded on the counter next to the sink, then left the kitchen and walked through the silent, dim dining room towards the lobby. When she reached it, she saw that Amelia was sitting on the sofa next to her blonde friend, talking and laughing against the light of the fire. She stepped forward eagerly, ready to tell Amelia all about the delightful afternoon. Maybe she'd even want to see what Katy had bought. As she approached, she made out the words Amelia spoke in low tones, her head close to the other girl's. "That mousy attitude is really just an act, you know. She's all Miss Snobbery if you actually talk to her. She reads all these classics." The girl feigned a yawn. "I've had to pretend to be interested in things like Jane Austen just to be able to talk to her." "Why even bother?" The other girl laughed, letting the sound grow louder, as though she'd forgotten they were supposed to be speaking confidentially. "How can you even ask that when you know how much I want the inside scoop on this place?" Amelia rolled her eyes. "We'll see if she's even worth it. I've had to take her to lunch and on walks and all kinds of—" At that moment she turned her head and saw Katy standing frozen behind them. She kept her mouth open, but no more sound came out for a minute. "What? Oh." The other girl also turned, and she had the grace to blush at the sight of Katy's face. "Katy!" Amelia recovered with a laugh and stood. "Where have you been all day? I wanted to—" She couldn't bear to even listen to the rest of whatever lie was coming, and she turned and fled towards her room, where she closed and locked the door, shoved her shopping bags off of her bed, and threw herself onto the mattress, face down, heart pounding, but eyes unexpectedly dry. So that was what Amelia really thought of her. Pretentious, boring, a means to an end. Hearing the cold words had been hurtful, yes, but the more she thought, the more she realized the pain wasn't primarily what she was feeling right now. Instead, it was the familiar sting of shame. Shame because, forced to be honest with herself, she had known all along that this was the kind of person Amelia was. If the girl was willing to gossip and slander the Thompsons behind their backs, why wouldn't she act the exact same way towards Katy? "Oh God," she choked, and realized with those simple words how long it had been since she'd prayed. She'd been so caught up in establishing herself, making her own way, gaining attention for herself, that she hadn't felt the need for help from above. In her mind's eye, she saw again the painted board from the lodge's dining room wall. "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom." "Of knowledge," she whispered. She knew the verse, yes, knew it by heart. And if she only would have acted on it, maybe she would not have acted quite so foolish. She slid off the bed and onto her knees, rested her elbows on the rich, colorful quilt, and began. "God, forgive me for my self-centeredness. Help me to think of others first and be satisfied with what you give me instead of always looking for something else." She stayed there for a long time, pouring out her heart, and she didn't notice that she was sleepy until she woke up, knees sore against the cold floor, head pillowed on her arms, leaning against the bed. Blinking in the darkness, she crept up into the bed and under the covers, and went back to sleep. Chapter 8. A banging on her door jolted her rudely awake. She sat up, rubbing her eyes and wondering for a moment whether she'd imagined it. No, there again was the sound, thumping against the wooden door of her room. "Katy!" called a voice. Beth's voice. Katy blinked for a moment, trying to will herself out from under the warm covers. Was it morning already? Was she late for work? No, a glance at her phone told her that it was only 2 a.m. "Coming," she said at last, forcing herself out into the cold of the room. She padded across the floor, grateful for the soft warmth of the rug once she reached it, then unlocked and opened her door. Beth stood there, face pale, curls unruly, stylish robe wrapped around pajamas. "Katy, I'm so sorry." Katy's accelerating heartbeat woke her up the rest of the way. "What is it? Is everything okay? Did something happen to Harry?" "Oh, no, everyone's fine. That is—" Beth looked back over her shoulder, then looked forward again. "It's my father." "Your father? Is he all right?" I don't know how to explain, Katy. He says you have to leave, now." Cold infiltrated Katy's chest. Now? But why? He says you're spreading rumors about him to the guests. Apparently somebody started saying that he's counterfeiting money back in the unused rooms, and somebody told him you're the one who started saying it. The cold spread through her body as she tried to take it all in. Amelia. That was Amelia's story. But why? Why start spreading the lie, and why pin it on her? I tried arguing with him, but he's so angry, Katy. I don't know what to do. Katy didn't know either. 2 in the morning was definitely not an ideal time to be traveling alone in a strange city. She had no way to even get anywhere from here if thrown out. And the idea of leaving the lodge, her job there, and Harry was the last thing she wanted. And yet she was amazed at how calm she felt. Despite the chill and the practical worries about what might come next, her heart remained at rest, as though it still reposed back in the luxurious bed she had left. She reached forward and touched Beth's arm. It's okay. I'll pack my things. Beth stared at her, then she closed her eyes tightly. No, it's not. It's not okay at all. We can't send you off in the middle of the night. But he says you're trespassing and that he'll call the police. Katy didn't know how real this threat was, but she didn't want to find out. I know it's not your fault. I'll call my dad. Maybe he can come get me or send someone. I'll figure it out. Beth opened her eyes and stared. Then she vehemently shook her head. No, I'm not sending you out in the cold alone. That's insane. Then what should I do? Katy asked, still astounded at how still and peaceful her mind felt in the midst of this bizarre situation. Beth thought for a moment, tugging at one of her curls. Then she straightened. I can't leave the lodge right now with Harry gone, but Holmes won't be needed for several hours. I'll get him to take you to the airport. You're not taking the bus alone at night. And I'll give you the money for the flight. No, I insist, she said when Katy opened her mouth to protest. It truly is the least I can do. She reached forward and wrapped Katy in an unexpected hug, squeezing tightly. I'm really sorry. I know you didn't say those things. I know you care about us. Katy hugged back, heart somehow peaceful and dreadfully aching all at once. The drive to the airport was half an hour long, and the chef spent the entire time grumbling. Really, sending somebody out at this time of night. How much damage could one little girl do in the time between now and actual morning? I suppose sleep isn't a necessity. Katy watched out the dark windows as they moved gradually into the city, from quaint shops lit along the road by quiet lights to buildings ablaze with illuminated windows even at 3:00 a.m. She wished she could disappear into the seat itself, hide her humiliation and her embarrassment. At least the good thing about Holmes's tirade was the fact that he didn't require her to respond to anything he said. He just kept talking. At last they reached the airport, and he changed his topic from their early morning drive to her flight. Beth said the soonest flight is at 7, so it'll be a while. You'll just have to go buy the tickets, then at least you'll have an abundance of time to get to where you need to go. He squinted through his glasses at the signs directing them every which way. Looks like... No, not this turn. Oh, that one! He swerved to guide the car to the drop-off point, then parked behind a white bus under fluorescent lighting. He turned towards her, keeping his hands on the steering wheel. Need help with your bags? No, thank you. I've got it. Thank you so much for the ride. I'm sorry. Rather than responding, he reached down between the seats and pulled up a brown paper bag, which he handed to her. She took it, studying his face for any clue of what it was. He only said, I know they won't let you take it through security, of course. I'm not an idiot. I just figured with all that extra time, you might get hungry before you even get there. She gripped the bag tighter. Thank you, was all she could manage past the lump in her throat. He shrugged. Nobody else ever does their own dishes. And with this non sequitur, he pushed a button to open the trunk of the car, leaving her to exit into the cold, dark night, retrieve her luggage, and watch him drive back to Southeaster Lodge to try to get a little more sleep before daybreak. For a moment she just stood shivering on the curb. Then she balanced her luggage and the brown paper bag as comfortably in her arms as she could, and moved into the massive, warm, bustling airport beyond. She found a bench just inside and sat to examine the contents of the bag. It proved to be full of muffins, and in the light she could see the words "Good Luck" on the outside of the bag in permanent marker. Her eyes burned as the comment about dishes returned to her mind. She'd never seen anything to think that the chef had any kind of appreciation for her, and yet apparently the fact that she'd washed her dishes after meals had meant something to him. It was nice to know. She ate a few muffins, then went to buy her ticket home, move through the arduous security process, and wait the long hours until her flight. Chapter 9. "Katy!" Matilda raced out the door with her hair flying behind her when Katy arrived, weary, at the sidewalk outside her home. Katy dropped her luggage to the ground and opened her arms, then was nearly knocked back by the force of her little sister against her. Sticky hands pressed to the back of her neck in a hug. "Katy?" Her mother peered out the open door, brow furrowed, and her eyes widened in surprise when she saw her oldest daughter. "What in the world? We weren't expecting you." She hurried down the walkway and embraced Katy with a little less force, but just as much warmth as Matilda. "It's a long story," Katy murmured, wondering whether the ache in her heart was sorrow over all that had passed, or simply the joy of a sad heart returning home. "Come inside and tell it, then. You must be freezing. How did you get here?" She looked up and down the street. "Flew, then took a taxi." "Oh, honey, why didn't you call? We would have picked you up." Katy hoisted up her luggage and shook her head. "I knew Dad would be at work, and I didn't want to bother you." The inside of the house was warm, almost too warm, and smelled of freshly baked bread. David, Amy, and Peter emerged from various rooms as she passed, and they all wanted hugs, which she willingly gave. She deposited her bags in her room, then returned to the front of the house to settle on the living room couch with her mother on one side, Peter on the other, and Matilda settled on her lap, with the other children waiting for tales of their big sister's adventures in chairs opposite. Katy took a breath and said, "I actually had to leave my job unexpectedly, so I thought I would just turn up and surprise you all." She smiled, hoping that would be enough for them for now. It wasn't. "Why did you have to leave?" Peter queried. "Just a misunderstanding," she said, meeting her mother's eyes. Mrs. Meyer nodded. More would be communicated later. She regaled them with stories of what it was like to clean a bed and breakfast, the fancy places she'd visited, and what she could say of the people she'd met there without getting into too much detail. At one point she caught her mother looking at the clock over the mantel. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said. "I shouldn't have assumed I could have all your attention. Did you need to do something? Can I help?" Her mother smiled at her. "No, it's not that. Actually, I know you're tired from your day of travel, but I wondered if you would be able to watch the children tonight. Your father and I had actually hoped to go out, but I didn't think we'd be able to." "I'd love to. Is tonight something special?" Her mother smiled. "Just February 14th. Valentine's Day. She'd completely forgotten. For a moment she wondered whether Southeaster Lodge would be doing anything to mark the holiday, but she banished the thought from her mind. That was over now. Her place was here. When her father arrived home, he was as surprised as she could have wished, and he wrapped her in a hug that made her feel like a little girl again in the best way. Then, before they got ready for their date, her parents pulled her into their room, sat her down, and insisted on hearing the full story. And she told them, not sparing herself in the telling. Her friendship with Amelia, the mystery of the fire-damaged wing, her work, what she'd suspected, what she'd discovered, what she believed Amelia had done, the general's response. Mr. Meyer grew visibly angry as he heard that part. "Why would he feel the need to throw you out without even speaking to you, and in the middle of the night?" Katy shrugged, both pained and pleasantly unburdened by the sharing of it all. "I don't know. I just know things are complicated up there, more than I thought. I'm grateful Beth helped me get home." Her father's frown didn't diminish. "That's not even legal. He had an agreement with you to provide lodging in exchange for your work. You had fulfilled your duties. He should be required to compensate you for—" Dave, Katy's mother put her hand on his arm. He stopped talking. I don't like being treated like that, Katy said slowly, and I wish he would have talked to me and gotten the real story, given me a chance. But I understand a little bit, I think. He's just let grief eat him up until I don't think he knows how to treat anyone right anymore. It's nothing personal towards me. And I'm safe. I'm home. It's okay. Her mother stood, walked over to her, and kissed her forehead, warming Katy all the way down to her toes. Now, when did my little bookworm get so wise? She said softly. Katy smiled. The last notes of Katy's lullaby faded into the night, and Matilda smiled up at her. I'm happy you're back, Katy, she said, voice heavy with sleepiness. Katy pulled the covers of the fuzzy pink blanket up under her sister's chin, leaned down to say, I'm happy too, then turned off the lamp and crept out of the room to a house that was finally quiet. As she stood in the middle of the living room, she wondered whether it was really true. Was she happy? She thought she was. As she went about her evening, caring for siblings, feeding them, reading to them, making sure teeth were brushed, she certainly felt content. Yet it remained concurrent with the subtle ache in her heart. Maybe it was just a lack of closure after having to leave the lodge the way she had. Nothing resolved, nothing confronted, no chance to plead her case. But maybe it was better that way. Maybe it was best to simply be grateful for how that brief chapter in her life had grown her. Now, with her attempt at adventure and romance out of the way, she could be content. She glanced at the clock. Only 8. Her parents would likely still be gone for a while. And despite her very long day, she felt brightly awake. The perfect time for reading. She snuck past bedrooms of sleeping children, up the stairs to her own, then back down, Northanger Abbey in hand. Then she curled up on the couch, pulled a soft blanket up over herself, and opened the book. Catherine's disposition was not naturally sedentary, nor had her habits been ever very industrious. But whatever might hitherto have been her defects of that sort, her mother could not but perceive them now to be greatly increased. She could neither sit still nor employ herself for 10 minutes together, walking round the garden and orchard again and again, as if nothing but motion was voluntary, and it seemed as if she could even walk about the house rather than remain fixed for any time in the parlor. Katy found herself smiling at this foolishness. Maybe her mother was right. Maybe it was a silly story. Maybe reading it had filled her head with too much romantic drama. And yet, while she might not be walking round the garden and the orchard again and again, there was something in her heart, that persistent ache, that felt an echo in this restlessness of Catherine's. Perhaps such feelings were simply part of life. As she reached to turn the page, a knocking startled her so much that she dropped the book, definitely losing her place. Had her mother and father lost their keys? But if they had, they wouldn't have been able to get home. Were they expecting someone? Was it simply a package being delivered? If the latter, they would doubtless go away in a moment or two. No, there was the knock again. It was worth at least going to peek out the window and see who was there. She got up, moved to the other side of the room, and carefully lifted one slat of the blinds to look towards the front door. A tall, slim, dark-haired man in a suit stood there, arms wrapped around himself in the cold. Without another thought, she flew to the door and opened it to reveal the face of Harry Thompson. In her amazement, all she could think to say was, "What are you doing here?" "Freezing at the moment," he said with a smile. She stepped aside to let him in and closed the door behind him. For several seconds they just stood in the entryway, he looking straight at her, arms still hugging himself, she looking back as long as she could before dropping her gaze to the floor. "Beth told me what happened," he said at last. "Katy, I don't know what to say." "Do you want to sit down?" she asked, gesturing towards the living room while trying to calm her fluttering heart. "Not really." He dropped his arms to his sides. "I know you weren't the one who spread those rumors. Why would you? And what my father did—" He shook his head. "It was inexcusable. If I had been there—" He didn't finish the sentence, and Katy wondered exactly what he would have done if he had been there.
I came straight from Houston after I talked to Beth, he explained after a moment of silence. By the way, there are a few hundred little tiny bottles of shampoo and conditioner in my car if you need any.
At this, Katy laughed, and it felt wonderful. The tension eased out of her body, and she sensed the old, familiar comfort in his presence. I think we're good, but thank you.
I think you're good too, he said softly.
She forced herself to meet his eyes again and found them smiling at her. You said, she began and faltered.
I said there was something I wanted to talk to you about when I got back. I mean, technically I'm not back, but I guess we can still talk about it. Though maybe you already know.
Maybe I do, she said, but talking is probably best anyway. He reached forward and again took her hand in both of his, filling her with warmth and banishing the ache that she had thought so foolishly might simply be inevitable. She still had so very much to learn about life.
Maybe we should sit down after all, he said.
He didn't let go of her hand as they walked into the living room and took their seats on the couch. And I leave it to be settled by whomsoever it may concern, whether Katy had embarked on the adventure she had so desired after all. This has been Southeaster Lodge by J. Grace Pennington. Text copyright 2024 by J. Grace Pennington. Production copyright 2025 by J. Grace Pennington. All rights reserved.